I want you to listen carefully because what I'm about to share is not just a concept, it's a calling. There comes a moment in the life of every avoidant, every person who's hidden behind walls, who built safety systems around themselves, when the one they unconsciously leaned on walks away. The super empath, the mirror of their soul, the one who held their chaos so they didn't have to, steps out of their life. And suddenly, that safety net, the illusion of security they thought was theirs, vanishes. And in that void, they panic. Their control, their distance, the carefully constructed armor, it no longer serves them. What they relied on to stabilize their world was never really under their control. It was never theirs to hold. The departure of the empath is not a punishment. It is the universe whispering, it's time to grow. It's time to stand on your own. They feel exposed. They feel fragile. They feel the fear they've been running from all these years. But here is the divine truth. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is the gateway to authenticity. When the safety system shuts down, it is not the end, it is the beginning. The avoidant is now forced to face the very things they have avoided, the unresolved pain, the unspoken emotions, the shadows of their own heart. And this is where the real transformation begins. Because when you can no longer hide behind another person's empathy, when you can no longer outsource your emotional stability, you are confronted with the raw power of your own being. You are invited to reclaim your strength. You are called to develop self-regulation, self-responsibility, and a heart that is whole even in solitude. The empath's departure is a mirror. It reflects back every blind spot, every fear, every denial. But mirrors are not here to shame us, they are here to awaken us. In the silence left behind, in the stillness that feels unbearable, is the divine opportunity to step into a new way of living, a new way of being, to realize that true safety has always been inside you, not outside. Pain, fear, and loss, they are sacred teachers. They demand your attention. They demand your courage. And when the avoidant finally answers that call, when they choose to face themselves fully, they emerge stronger, wiser, and more capable of genuine connection than they ever were before. Remember this, the world does not abandon you to break you. It abandons you to awaken you. The departure of the super empath is the most honest gift life can give. It forces the avoidant to stop running, to stop hiding, and to finally meet themselves. And when they do, they discover a power that no external presence could ever give, a power that is eternal, unwavering, and fully their own. Stand in that power. Step into that truth. And know this, the emptiness left behind is not a void. It is the canvas upon which you will paint your freedom, your wholeness, your unshakable life. Avoidants, by nature, build emotional walls around themselves. They have mastered the art of detachment, the careful dance of keeping others at arm's length, and the illusion of independence. On the surface, they appear self-sufficient, composed, even untouchable. But beneath that calm exterior lies a hidden truth. Their emotional stability is not entirely self-generated. Somewhere deep within, they have grown dependent on an anchor, someone who holds their emotions when they cannot. This anchor is often a super empath, a person whose sensitivity and depth allow them to absorb the emotional turbulence that the avoidant refuses to face. For the avoidant, the empath is both invisible scaffolding and an emotional life raft, maintaining a balance the avoidant has never fully learned to achieve on their own. The avoidant's reliance on this anchor is subtle. It does not announce itself with dramatic confession. It manifests in small ways. The relief that comes when the empath soothes their anxiety, the calm that spreads when they know someone is capable of holding the intensity they refuse to engage with. It is a quiet, almost imperceptible dependency, but it is powerful. The avoidant has trained themselves to suppress vulnerability, to sidestep confrontation with their inner fears, yet the empath's presence allows them a paradoxical freedom, the freedom to remain emotionally distant while still feeling a sense of equilibrium. The avoidance world becomes stable not because they have mastered their inner terrain, but because someone else quietly absorbs the emotional storm on their behalf. This dependency is not inherently negative, but it is fragile and conditional. Avoidants often fail to recognize the depth of their reliance until it is disrupted. The super empath, by nature, cannot remain indefinitely. Empaths have boundaries, emotional thresholds, and their own needs for growth and self-preservation. When they step away, when the anchor is no longer available, the avoidant is abruptly confronted with the consequences of the emotional delegation they have relied upon. The stability they took for granted evaporates, and the internal safety system they assumed was autonomous is revealed as dependent, incomplete, and untested. The avoidant experiences a profound disorientation, a sudden awareness that the emotional security they thought was self-generated was, in truth, borrowed. This collapse can feel devastating. The avoidant may experience anxiety, confusion, or even panic. The emotions they have long avoided, fear, sadness, loneliness, flood in, unchecked, because there is no empath present to absorb them. In that moment, the avoidant is forced into direct contact with the very inner terrain they have habitually avoided. This is both terrifying and transformative. The dependency on an emotional ancho, while it allowed survival, also masked a critical opportunity for growth. Without the super empath, the avoidant can no longer hide behind external regulation. They are invited, or perhaps compelled, to cultivate an internal framework of stability, to learn the art of self-soothing, self-awareness, and emotional responsibility. Ultimately, the avoidant's dependency on a super empath highlights a universal truth. True emotional resilience cannot be outsourced. External anchors can guide, stabilize, and mirror us, but the internal capacity to regulate one's emotions, to face fear, and to sit with vulnerability must come from within. The avoidance journey is a path from dependency to self-mastery, from borrowed equilibrium to genuine inner strength. The departure of the super empath is not a punishment. It is a divine challenge, a call to awaken the dormant capacity for emotional self-sufficiency that has always existed beneath the surface. It is in this crucible of absence, disorientation, and necessity that the avoidant finally has the chance to discover a power that is entirely their own. Avoidants often pride themselves on control. To them, control is not merely a habit. It is a shield, a carefully constructed fortress designed to protect their vulnerability. They have learned early in life or through repeated relational patterns that to feel safe, they must manage the world around them. They monitor their emotions, regulate their interactions, and strategically maintain and distance from intimacy. On the surface, this control seems absolute, almost impenetrable, and the avoidant may even believe they are entirely self-reliant. Yet beneath this appearance of mastery lies a profound paradox. Their sense of control is largely an illusion, dependent on circumstances and, more specifically, on the presence of others, often super empaths who absorb the chaos they cannot contain. The illusion of control functions subtly, often going unnoticed until it is shattered. Avoidants convince themselves that they are the architects of their emotional world, that by staying detached or by setting strict boundaries, they are managing life, but in reality, they are only managing what they allow themselves to engage with. The moments they avoid, the fears, the insecurities, the unresolved pain, do not disappear. They are merely deferred, often projected onto the presence of someone else who can tolerate and regulate it. The super empath serves as a stabilizing force, an emotional buffer that masks the cracks in the avoidance facade. As long as the empath is present, the avoidant can continue to believe they are in control, even though the foundation of that control rests on someone else's empathy, insight, and emotional labor. This dynamic creates a dangerous dependency masked as independence. The avoidant becomes adept at appearing composed while relying on the external regulation provided by the empath. The illusion is so convincing that the avoidant may genuinely believe they are self-sufficient, when in fact their perceived control is contingent. It exists only because someone else is willing to absorb the turbulence they cannot face themselves. They think they are navigating life skillfully, but in truth, they are navigating someone else's willingness to maintain equilibrium for them. This is the silent paradox of the avoidant mind. Control is prized, yet it is fundamentally borrowed. When the super empath leaves, the illusion fractures. The avoidant is confronted with a raw and unfiltered emotional reality. The stability they depended on was never fully theirs. The emotions they have carefully compartmentalized, the fears they have long denied, the uncertainty they have avoided, all surge forward simultaneously without the external anchor. The avoidant must face the truth that their control has always been conditional, fragile, and incomplete. The collapse of this illusion is often terrifying. For years, they have believed that they could manage life on their own terms, only to discover that the very terms they depended on were not entirely under their control. Yet this moment of disillusionment is not without purpose. It is a divine invitation to step into authentic mastery of self. True control is not about manipulating or avoiding emotions. It is about cultivating the internal capacity to navigate life with awareness, courage, and emotional integrity. The departure of the empath exposes the gaps in the avoidant's self-regulation and compels them to develop resilience from within. It challenges them to stop outsourcing emotional stability, to sit with discomfort, and to learn that the power to regulate their inner world has always been accessible, not through distance or avoidance, but through present self-reflection and courage. In essence, the illusion of control is both a protective mechanism and a hidden prison. It shields the avoidant from vulnerability while simultaneously preventing true mastery. The shattering of this illusion, triggered by the absence of the super empath, is not a punishment. It is a profound opportunity. It is an awakening, a call to recognize that real control comes not from avoiding emotions or depending on others, but from cultivating inner sovereignty. When the avoidant embraces this truth, they move from a borrowed stability to a genuine, unshakable strength that no external presence can provide. The illusion falls away, and what remains is the transformative power of self-mastery, courage, and authentic freedom. For the avoidant, vulnerability is not merely uncomfortable, it is a perceived threat to their very sense of self. They have learned, often through early life experiences or repeated relational disappointments, that opening their heart fully can result in pain, rejection, or loss of control. As a result, they construct emotional fortresses, walls of distance, and habits of detachment that protect them from the rawness of human intimacy. But this protecti is only surface deep. Beneath the armor, beneath the carefully maintained calm, lies a constant tension, a quiet fear that their emotions, if allowed to flow freely, could overwhelm them. This fear of vulnerability is both a shield and a trap. It keeps them safe from potential harm, yet it also prevents them from experiencing the fullness of their own humanity. The presence of a super empath often masks this fear. Empaths possess a unique capacity to feel, hold, and process emotional intensity, not only their own, but also the subtle, often hidden emotions of those around them. For the avoidant, this creates an unconscious reliance. The empath becomes a buffer, a stabilizing force who can manage the intensity that the avoidant cannot face. With the empath present, the avoidant can maintain distance while still feeling a semblance of safety. They do not have to confront the rawness of their own emotional landscape. Someone else absorbs the weight, allows them to remain detached, and keeps the underlying fear dormant. In this way, the fear of vulnerability is quieted, not resolved, allowing the avoidant to continue functioning as though their emotional armor is sufficient. The real challenge emerges when the super empath leaves. Suddenly, the safety net is gone. The avoidant is faced with a raw, unmediated reality. The emotions they have avoided, suppressed, or outsourced surge to the surface. Fear, sadness, longing, and anxiety, all the feelings they have long denied, are unavoidable. In that moment, the avoidant's carefully maintained control crumbles, and the underlying vulnerability they have spent a lifetime avoiding becomes undeniable. It can feel like exposure to a storm they have never learned to weather alone. For many, the experience is disorienting, even frightening. They may panic, withdraw further, or struggle to process emotions that have accumulated over years of avoidance. Yet within this fear lies the potential for profound transformation. Vulnerability, though terrifying, is also the gateway to authenticity, growth, and resilience. The avoidance fear is not a permanent limitation. It is a signal, a guide pointing toward what must be faced for true emotional freedom. When they are forced to confront their vulnerability, they are presented with an opportunity to cultivate courage, self-awareness, and emotional mastery. The absence of the super empath, while painful, acts as a mirror, reflecting the unacknowledged and unprocessed emotions that have long been hidden behind the facade of detachment. Learning to embrace vulnerability is not a linear process. It requires patience, compassion for oneself, and a willingness to sit with discomfort. It requires recognizing that vulnerability is not synonymous with weakness. It is a form of strength, a necessary step toward wholeness. The avoidant begins to understand that true security cannot be found in distance, control, or reliance on others. It must emerge from the capacity to one's emotions fully and to allow oneself to be truly known, even if only by oneself at first. Ultimately, the fear of vulnerability is both a challenge and an invitation. It exposes the limits of avoidance and dependence while offering a pathway toward authentic strength. When the avoidant begins to sit with their emotions, to feel without defense, and to embrace the uncertainty inherent in human connection, they move beyond the false security of their armor. They discover that vulnerability, once feared, is the very key to resilience, self-mastery, and genuine relational freedom. In that awakening, the avoidant can finally access a depth of self-understanding and empowerment that no external presence, no matter how empathetic, could ever provide. One of the most profound truths about human relationships is that some people act as mirrors, reflecting back to us the parts of ourselves we cannot see. For the avoidant, the super empath serves this role with extraordinary intensity. They are not just companions or supporters, they are living, breathing reflections of the avoidant's blind spots, unresolved patterns, and emotional shadows. The avoidant, accustomed to avoidance and self-protection, may not initially recognize this reflection. It can feel uncomfortable, even threatening, because the empath's presence forces an awareness that the avoidant has long resisted. The super empath illuminates the gaps between who the avoidant is and who they could be. They show the places where walls have been built, where fear has dictated behavior, and where avoidance has disguised itself as strength. The mirror is never accusatory. The empath does not seek to shame or punish. Their role is subtler, almost divine in its precision. Through empathy, patience, and profound attunement, they create a space where the avoidance patterns are reflected, back in a way that is visible, undeniable, and unavoidable. The avoidant may notice recurring conflicts, subtle emotional withdrawals, or moments where they instinctively push others away. These moments, when reflected by the empath, become lessons disguised as friction. The avoidant may resist the reflection at first, perceiving it as criticism or intrusion. Yet the truth is far deeper. The super empath holds up a mirror not to wound, but to awaken. They show the avoidant the unexamined corners of their psyche, and, in doing so, point the way toward growth that the avoidant could never achieve alone. When the super empath leaves, the avoidant is suddenly confronted with the absence of this reflective presence. The mirror disappears, and with it, the external validation or correction that has guided them indirectly for so long. The avoidant may feel adrift, unmoored, and unprepared to navigate the internal world they have long avoided. What was once illuminated by the empath's sensitivity now exists in shadow. The avoidant can no longer ignore the patterns, the fears, or the avoidance behaviors. They are forced to see themselves directly. This is where the potential for growth is greatest. For the first time, the avoidant must learn to reflect upon themselves without an external guide. They must cultivate awareness, insight, and discernment from within. This process is often painful because self-reflection without guidance exposes the rawness of avoidance in its pure form. The avoidant is forced to recognize how often they have escaped discomfort, delayed emotional processing, or relied on others to carry burdens they were not ready to hold. The absence of the empath is not a punishment. It is an invitation to take ownership of one's growth. The mirror has not vanished. It has merely been placed within the avoidant's own hands. The challenge is to see clearly, to confront the shadows, and to embrace responsibility for one's emotional evolution. Through this confrontation, transformation becomes possible. The avoidant begins to recognize that growth does not require another person to reflect their blind spots. It requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to examine oneself with clarity. They discover that the very patterns that once seemed to limit them are actually the doorway to deeper self-understanding. By facing themselves fully, without deflection or distraction, the avoidant can begin to cultivate authentic emotional maturity, empathy for others, and, most importantly, self-compassion. The departure of the super empath, while initially disorienting, becomes a sacred turning point. It marks the moment when the avoidant must transition from external reflection to internal mastery. The mirror of growth, once provided by another, now resides within the avoidant themselves. It is a reminder that personal evolution is not a passive experience, but a deliberate, conscious journey. In embracing this challenge, the avoidant learns that true growth is not dependent on anyone else. It is a choice, a practice, and a commitment to face the self fully, courageously, and authentically. For the avoidant, the departure of a super empath is often experienced as a crisis. The stability they have relied upon, the quiet support that absorbed their emotional turbulence suddenly vanishes, leaving them in a state of disorientation and emotional turbulence. At first, this crisis can feel unbearable. The carefully constructed walls that have protected them for so long seem insufficient. The routines that maintained their sense of control crumble, and the illusions of independence they once clung to are exposed as fragile. It is a moment of profound vulnerability, one that shakes the foundations of the avoidant's emotional world. And yet, within this very crisis lies a hidden divine potential, the catalyst for awakening, transformation, and self-mastery. Crisis has a way of cutting through the illusions we cling to. For the avoidant, who has long relied on external anchors to regulate their inner world, the absence of the super empath is an undeniable wake-up call. The emotional safety net they depended on is gone, and the turbulence they have avoided so skillfully must now be faced directly. Anxiety, fear, sadness, and uncertainty, all the feelings that were deferred or delegated to someone else, rise to the surface. This moment of raw, unfiltered experience is uncomfortable, even frightening, but it is necessary. The crisis acts as a mirror, reflecting the avoidant's unprocessed emotions, unmet needs, and unexamined patterns with brutal honesty. In the intensity of this moment, there is no place to hide. It is important to understand that crisis is not punishment, it is a divine teacher. Life does not orchestrate these moments to harm us, it designs them to awaken us. When the avoidant experiences this upheaval, they are presented with a unique opportunity, the chance to step into their own emotional power. The crisis forces them to develop skills and capacities they may have long neglected: self-reflection, emotional regulation, courage, and self-reliance. The intensity of the moment demands that they face what they have been avoiding, not as a threat, but as a challenge, a call to grow. The very discomfort that feels destabilizing is, in truth, a catalyst for transformation. Crisis also provides clarity. When external supports are removed, the avoidant begins to see the dynamics of their own patterns more clearly. They recognize the ways in which they have relied on others to carry their emotional burdens, the habits of avoidance that have limited their growth, and the fears that have dictated their behavior. In this clarity, there is freedom. They begin to understand that the responsibility for emotional stability cannot be outsourced indefinitely. It must be cultivated from within. The crisis, therefore, is both a breaking point and a turning point. It shatters illusions, but it also illuminates the path toward self-mastery. The transformational power of crisis lies in the choice it presents. The avoidant can respond with resistance, denial, or continued avoidance, prolonging suffering and dependency. Or they can respond with courage, introspection, and a commitment to self-growth. By choosing the latter, they turn what initially appears to be a moment of collapse into a moment of creation. The emotional turbulence that once threatened to overwhelm them becomes the fuel for developing resilience. emotional intelligence, and authentic self-reliance. The crisis, in this sense, is not a barrier. It is the very bridge to empowerment. Ultimately, the departure of the super empath and the resulting crisis is a sacred intervention. It forces the avoidant to confront what they have long hidden, to face themselves fully, and to discover inner resources they may not have realized existed. What initially feels like loss, disruption, or chaos is, in reality, an opportunity for radical transformation. The crisis strips away dependence, dismantles illusions of control, and creates the conditions for true emotional freedom. When embraced with courage and presence, it becomes a powerful catalyst, propelling the avoidant into a new level of self-awareness, self-responsibility, and authentic emotional strength, one that no external presence can ever provide. When the super empath leaves, the avoidant is suddenly faced with an emotional reality they have long avoided. All the feelings they have suppressed, ignored, or delegated to someone else now surge to the surface. This process can feel overwhelming, chaotic, and even frightening, but it is, in truth, an essential detox for the soul. For years, the avoidant has built protective barriers, walls of distance, habits of deflection, and emotional compartmentalization that have allowed them to function without fully confronting the depth of their own emotional landscape. The empath's presence often served as a buffer, absorbing the intensity, holding the turbulence, and allowing the avoidant to maintain an appearance of composure. With that anchor gone, the emotional residue they have accumulated cannot be contained any longer. The departure forces a cleansing, a purging, and a confrontation with the emotions that have long been denied. This emotional detox is not gentle. It can manifest as waves of anxiety, bursts of sadness, moments of loneliness, and the resurfacing of past regrets. Every suppressed fear, unresolved grievance, and unprocessed longing rises to the surface in a way that feels unavoidable. The avoidant may feel as if they are being flooded, as if the carefully controlled reality they maintained has shattered, leaving only raw emotion. At first, this can feel destabilizing. It can feel like the world they have constructed to protect themselves is collapsing. But this intensity is necessary. It is the mind, body, and soul's way of forcing the release of what no longer serves them, of clearing space for clarity, growth, and authentic emotional processing. The emotional detox is not just about facing negative feelings, it is about recognizing the depth of what has been carried unconsciously. The avoidant begins to see how reliance on others to regulate emotions has delayed their own development of self-soothing and internal balance. Every suppressed sadness or avoided confrontation with fear is revealed as a missed opportunity for personal growth. The process demands courage, patience, and self-compassion. The avoidant is forced to sit with discomfort without running, to observe their own reactions without judgment, and to allow emotions to flow naturally rather than controlling or deflecting them. This is a sacred opportunity. In the absence of the empath, the avoidant learns that emotions are not threats to control. They are signals, guides, and teachers. By allowing themselves to feel fully without denial or suppression, they begin to cultivate emotional literacy, the ability to recognize, understand, and integrate feelings into conscious awareness. This integration is transformative because it builds the foundation for authentic relationships, self-awareness, and inner resilience. The emotional detox reveals the depth of the avoidant's humanity, showing them that vulnerability, once feared, is actually a source of strength and self-knowledge. The process also redefines the avoidant's relationship with themselves. For years, they may have measured stability through the presence of another, relying on the empath to hold space for emotions they could not confront. Now, without that external support, they are invited to develop self-reliance in the truest sense. Emotional detox is a training ground for autonomy. The avoidant learns to recognize triggers, to feel without shame, and to navigate emotional turbulence with awareness. Every wave of emotion that rises and is consciously processed strengthens the internal muscles of resilience, empathy, and self-understanding. Ultimately, this emotional detox, though uncomfortable, is liberating. It strips away the accumulated weight of avoidance, denial, and dependency, leaving the avoidant with clarity, strength, and a newfound capacity for self-mastery. It is an awakening to the fact that emotional stability is not something to be borrowed, it is cultivated. And through this process, the avoidant begins to understand a profound truth. The very absence they feared, the departure they resisted, has opened a doorway to wholeness, authenticity, and the deep, unshakable freedom that comes from facing oneself fully. When the super empath leaves, the avoidant is left alone with the echoes of their own emotions. For a lifetime, they have relied on someone else to regulate the intensity of what they feel, to absorb the chaos they could not manage, and to provide a sense of stability they could not generate internally. In the absence of that external support, a profound awakening occurs, the awakening of self-responsibility. For the first time, the avoidant is faced with the undeniable truth that no one else can carry their emotional weight. No one else can provide the sense of safety, clarity, or balance that they have long sought. This realization is both frightening and liberating because it forces a choice: continue living in dependency or step into the full responsibility of one's own emotional life. Self-responsibility is not merely about managing feelings. It is about claiming ownership of the entirety of one's inner world. It is a shift from being a passive participant in life to becoming an active architect of one's emotional reality. The avoidant begins to see that they can no longer outsource their growth, their healing, or their stability. The departure of the super empath removes the, safety net they had unconsciously relied upon, and in that removal lies the opportunity for profound transformation. They are invited to learn, sometimes painfully, that emotional freedom, resilience, and wholeness are cultivated from within, and that no external presence, no matter how empathetic or understanding, can substitute for the inner work required. This awakening often begins with discomfort. The avoidant may feel fear, confusion, and even anger at the emptiness left behind. But beneath the initial discomfort is a sacred opportunity, the chance to reclaim personal power that has long been latent. Responsibility is the key to empowerment. By choosing to face their emotions, confront their avoidance patterns, and engage with life fully, the avoidant begins to cultivate a strength that is independent, unshakable, and authentic. Every moment of self-reflection, every act of conscious emotional engagement builds the muscles of self-mastery. Slowly, the avoidant realizes that they are capable of holding themselves, guiding themselves, and regulating themselves in ways they never imagined possible. Self-responsibility also reshapes the avoidant's understanding of relationships. Previously, they may have unconsciously sought out empaths to stabilize and regulate them, believing that connection required dependence. Now, through taking full ownership of their inner world, they can enter relationships from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. They learn that authentic connection is not a way to escape themselves, but a way to share themselves fully, freely, and consciously. The absence of the empath teaches them that external support is a complement to internal responsibility, not a substitute for it. This awakening is transformative because it shifts the avoidant from fear to empowerment, from dependency to autonomy, and from avoidance to conscious presence. It teaches that emotional security is not something granted by others. It is earned through awareness, courage, and deliberate practice. The avoidant learns to sit with discomfort, to navigate uncertainty, and to embrace the fullness of their humanity without outsourcing the work of growth. Responsibility, once feared, becomes the vehicle for freedom, and the void left by the empath becomes the fertile ground for the development of true self-reliance. Ultimately, the awakening of self-responsibility is a sacred turning point in the avoidance journey. It is the moment when external crutches fall away, and the avoidant discovers that the power to regulate, heal, and thrive has always existed within them. They realize that life does not require dependence on others to feel complete. It requires courage to face themselves, discipline to engage with their inner world, and the willingness to embrace both discomfort and possibility. In this awakening, they step fully into their own sovereignty, claiming the strength, freedom, and authenticity that have always been their birthright, and discovering a life no longer defined by avoidance, but by conscious, empowered presence. Thank for trusting me to share this journey of insight and transformation with you, wishing you strength, clarity, and courage on the path ahead. Goodbye and take care.